So, warm welcome to everyone joining into this Zoom space from all your various time zones and continents. So today is a special event of the series Tibet in Canada, Canada on Tibet, a series that highlights the various academic intersections of Tibet and Canada, presenting either Tibetan scholars based in Canada, or, as is the case today, scholars of Tibet from or residing in Canada. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Maria Turek, who will give us today a book talk. Has her book titled Buddhist Hermits in Eastern Tibet, Saint-Makingand and Ascetic Performance, published with Routledge, is due to come out next week, as I just learned. So I will send you the link to the book shortly. So it explores the ritual and social empowerment of Buddhist meditators under a charismatic master, how to achieve enlightenment in this lifetime and in this body. So first of all, congratulations for this achievement. It's a specific niche of scholarship, and your book has been years in the making. I personally first came to know about your research in 2013 in Ulaanbaatar, when we first met, just as you finished your PhD about this hermit community in Kham. I was amazed and thrilled to discover the amazing access you gained into this exceptional community of practitioners. It's very exciting news that your research will be widely available soon. And second, thank you very much for presenting the first previews of your book with us at GRID, so we are doubly excited. So to present Maria in a few words, I will say that she's an anthropologist of global Tibetan Buddhism, who has been affiliated with the University of Toronto, where she has taught for a number of years, and she's now an independent scholar. She's originally from Poland and earned her PhD from Humboldt University in Berlin. She previously held a full-time faculty position at Bonn University and was a research fellow with the Robert H.N. Ho Family Foundation Program in Buddhist Studies at the American Council of Learned Societies. She has published over a dozen papers on hermits in Eastern Tibet, on the history of Nangchen, on the Barom Kagyu school in Kham, and on kingship and identity among Yushu Tibetans since 1951. She examines how contemporary reiterations of Tibetan Buddhist orthopraxy, local narratives, and religious historiography shape Buddhist identities among Tibetans in China and in the diaspora, at the intersection of traditional identity and contemporary belonging. So without further ado, congratulations, Maria, and the screen is yours. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Isabel, for this wonderful introduction. It's quite humbling to hear all about my work through the lips of somebody else, another scholar. Thank you. And thank you, Natalia, for organizing everything, for all your support, setting everything up. I'm really excited to be a part of this meeting today, to be sharing about my book. I'm going to call it a pre-launch. It would have, of course, I'm excited to be launching the book, but I firmly believe in in-person meetings. So I would like to ideally really launch this book, kick it off in person. But this is wonderful. And I'm so moved by so many of you who are here, who found the time to listen to the book talk today. It's going to be a bit of a mixture. I will be reading excerpts from the book. I'll be commenting. I'll be showing you pictures. Let me get to my presentation, show you the agenda for today. I'll be showing you many pictures because so it happens, we know that publishers have their limitations and book contracts have their limitations. So I couldn't enclose as many pictures into the book as I would have wanted to. And obviously in ethnography, we know that books, that visuals, they contain a lot of information, a lot of data. So they're a great way to learn about the field. So I'll be showing you some of those. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk to you today about this book in general and why I picked this topic, why this book, the how, so how I wrote it and my whole approach. There are some interesting, I think, questions to ask in terms of why this book and my own aims. It was a bit of a psychoanalytical exercise for me to self-analyze myself, and maybe even a bit of a self-ethnography too, in terms of why I wanted to write about this, why I wanted to publish. It's interesting for the dialogue of different fields, I think. I'm going to talk about two main terms that I'm using throughout the book, sainthood and asceticism, just because they jump right at us on the book cover. And I know that some people do not think that they're very palatable for Tibetan studies because they have a very strong Christian connotation. So I'll be defending my choice a little bit, but also explaining why I chose. There are some thoughts behind that. So yeah, and then I want to leave enough room for just to talk about one. I wrote here a few key themes and arguments, but I won't have time for much, so I'll just touch upon one a little bit and then show you pictures and walk you around the field a little bit, and then I'll be hoping for your questions and comments. So that's what I'm hoping to do today. Okay. Okay. So my book, as Isabel has already explained, but I will just very briefly recap with the overall maybe blurb. The book explores the ritual and social empowerment of Buddhist monastics devoted to meditation under a charismatic master known as Tsotim Tachin. It's based on ethnographic research in 2007 and 2008 at a remote hermitage in Yushu Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture, Qinghai province in China. And you can see I have a little map here prepared by Keith. I'm very happy and thankful to Keith for that. If you can see Gyeokundo, which is a major urban center in Kham, you're going to see Chodrak. I didn't include the Wylie here, so apologies for that. But this is the main monastery, and Lachi or Lassi, as it's pronounced locally, Lassi Gunda, is located above Chodrak Monastery. By the way, I have the pronunciation Lapchi in the book because I was convinced by the publisher that we should speak to the wider Tibetan studies field, and so that's made into the book, and that's also a conscious quote from the main Lama, from the master Tsotim Tachin. It's a nod to Milarepa and a quote from Milarepa's biography, so that's why Lapchi or Lachi or Lassi in Longchen dialect. Okay, so the book examines contemplative practices and ascetic regimes as performances of renunciation, self-formation, and devotion, arguing that the master performs the ideal of Buddhist asceticism via his body and in front of a participant audience. This book offers a full-length ethnography of lifelong Tibetan hermits practicing in one of the many meditation schools called Gomda in ethnic Tibet regions of China. Meditation schools operate differently from monasteries, Gomba, such as the well-documented monastic institutions around Lhasa and Labrang in Katok, or those in the Himalayan world or in the Indian diasporic Tibetosphere. Meditation schools are collective hermitages for a structured training in a meditation curriculum. They are deliberately remote and protected by different layers of ritual boundaries, including the emphasis on the secrecy of practices. Their inhabitants are frequently committed to self-denying corporeal regimes, such as sleeping while seated upright in meditation posture. So you'll see the monasteries are typically, they have a different curriculum. They have the emphasis on collective rituals, and the lifestyle is typically freer, and there's a lot of discipline aspect and everything around meditation in meditation schools. Paralleling Tibet's famed hermit Milarepa, who said to have lived between the 11th and 12th century, the master is believed to have achieved liberation in this body and life, demonstrating that renunciation can be empowering and elite practices in local tradition can be relatable to untrained laity and transnational practitioners alike. So this is La Segunda, founded in 2005 by Tsotim Tachin, founded for meditation training, officially recorded as a school, as an educational project. so that the government allows this to happen. But I will speak about the revival a little bit, because I know that there's not only Tibet scholars here, but also folks from maybe the wider public. So I'll touch on that. It's inhabited by mainly female monastics and located at a remote area above Chodrak Monastery, a few hours car ride outside of Jekondo. I have a technical question to you all, mostly Natalia and Isabel. I can see something on my screen that looks like I have been scribbling on like a Zoom whiteboard. Do you also see that?
Yes,
Right
I
now,
think
yes.
somebody has annotated or done something.
Yeah,
There's
there's
two
some
ways to handle it. Either we leave it there because it's not too disturbing, or you stop your screen sharing
Mhm.
and open again your screen sharing and it will disappear.
I
You
can
can
try to do that, but I cannot find my cursor. So I guess we'll just have to bear with it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I can just operate my mouse, but my cursor, I cannot see it moving on the screen.
That's fine. It's really tiny. It's not too disturbing.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
very visible.
Sorry, Natalia, what was that?
I said it's barely visible.
Okay,
It's
thank you. Thanks so much. So to everyone out here, it's not part of the presentation. Sorry, it's my technical inability here. Anyway, okay, so the nuns live in these cabins that you can see, and they're situated below the stone hut of their lama. This is an important element in this whole hermitage. The lama lives above. By the way, this is how the monasteries, the first Kajipa monasteries, were founded. That, for instance, at least according to the Namtar, to the hagiographies of the patriarchs, a lama would settle somewhere in the mountains, and his disciples would settle around and below him. And then they just wanted to stay throughout their whole life. And this is how the first monastic communities were founded. So this is very much going back to the same model, historical model. Okay, so there is some transnational attention that the center has received since its founding. And I've talked about the transnational aspects elsewhere. And my book focuses solely on the local dynamics, because they're very, very interesting themselves. And what that, in extension, can potentially be interesting to transnational audiences, of whom I see very much myself part of. Okay, so my methodology and approach, very shortly. My approach was very much a sociocultural anthropological one. I particularly see myself as a follower of symbolic and interpretative anthropology after Turner and Mary Douglas, but it's built on a big structuralist base. So I'm always on like aware and talking to the up and the down, the left and the right, and all the oppositions and the structure. And I see a lot of structure happening in the like how this Lama builds up his charisma. I saw that very helpful. These theories very helpful for that. My methodology obviously was observation, participant observation, ethnographic interviews, oral life histories, textual analysis, and ethnohistory. That last element particularly fascinating to me for me to work in this field. And to those of you who are aware of my dissertation, which has been out there, as Isabel mentioned, since 2014, if 13, so I took the same ethnography, but I gave it a bit of a different framing. I added some theories. The first theory package I added was performance theory, and then also I went deeper into theories of asceticism. The focus on performativity of ascetic practice and of sainthood enables me to take a closer look onto the intimate innermost dynamics of transmutation from an ordinary person to a practitioner of ascetic discipline, and from that to the role of a saint. Adopting performativity as a framework for analysis also highlights the social complexity of ascetic practice and accomplishment. For every performance, there is an audience. Even the most secret practices in a ritually sealed enclosure are acted out through the body according to a script sanctioned by tradition which is of course subscribed to by a wider community. And today we also know to, an extension to by a transnational community. So, and speaking of transnational, let's talk about my positionality and my intentions with this book. So, yeah, why this book? What were my aims? I wanted to peek behind the curtains into the interiority of retreat. This is the first case study that we have on hermetism on retreat. I'm not counting a beautiful survey by Crook and Low. They made a survey through the different Drukpa Kajupa monasteries and, hermitages in the Himalaya, which was published in the 80s. But this is, it looks like it's the first case study. And this, of course, has to do with the fact these places are notoriously difficult to study. You need to get access, and that's something that is not easy. Not to mention other difficulties of working in China, and working in remote places, etc. Coming back to my goals, I wanted to look in at the role of retreat in society, because meditation in retreat is such a ubiquitous phenomenon in Tibetan Buddhism. Everybody knows that. It's also, again, now globally famous as part of global Buddhism. And yet we are not asking ourselves that much, what social role it has had in the sort of original Buddhist societies where it originated. Another one of my goals would be to do away with monolithic views on monasticism and Tibetan religiosity. We routinely speak of monasteries and monks, and then we speak of lay people and folk religion. We don't necessarily see them as disjointed now, thanks to the work of many scholars. So that's great, but we still have this sharp division, and there's not much nuance there. So I wanted to add to the nuance, because monks in the monastery, or monks in the hermitage and nuns in the hermitage, very often see themselves as completely different from those in a monastery. And if you look at how they live, their whole ethos, how they practice, they are very different. So a monk is not a monk is not a monk. It's not the same. Okay, I also wanted to promote Central Kham in Nangchen. Yay, shout out. Yeah, so this is my huge area of interest. It's a Kham ever since I went to Kham in 2007. That was the first time. It has become a huge part of who I am personally. I just have personal stakes in this. I'm invested. I'm a Kamo. I have been called a Kamo. So a woman from Kham. I take it as a huge compliment. And I just want to promote that amazing part of Tibet that is probably not talked about enough. And there's so much interesting culture historically and today to be exploring. So I'm glad that Katie is here on the call, and maybe some others who I haven't seen, who are also devoted very much to Kamba Buddhism as a phenomenon, which is very strong. Another one of my aims, I wanted to, and I would like to initiate maybe a dialogue of positionalities and fields. I'm a Buddhist practitioner, so I'm coming out with that in this call. And this has become crucial in getting access to this religious field. The master of this place said several times he doesn't want tourists coming in and budging in. He wants people who are genuinely interested in the Buddha Dharma. And so I was also tested in my commitment and my seriousness. However, as you can see in this photo, the co-practitioner, the insider positionality to some extent is great to get access, but you can never fully blend in. Because as you can see in this photo, I'm trying to photograph a cozy dinner with the nuns, and you can see the critical look that Chinyapamo, this one nun, has on her face, very critically, very keenly observing what I'm doing there, taking a photograph. And I was also encouraged to collapse the boundary between these two, between the scholar and the practitioner, But this would have ended my scholarly project because I was encouraged to just be a disciple of the Lama and stay and build a hut. But that would have brought everything to an end. So that's not easy. And back to that dialogue, very often what I see is that Buddhist communities or Buddhist practitioner communities, maybe more precisely neo-Buddhist practitioner communities, and academic communities unnecessarily regard each other with much disdain, and they each claim monopoly for true knowledge. In this case, about, for instance, meditation, right? And my wish, maybe I'm naive, but my wish is to have more dialogue, because we can learn from one another, and that's what I've been trying to do within my positionality, within this dialogue I've been having with myself. And anthropology, I believe, is a great tool to do that, because anthropology, yeah, guess what? Even the word anthropos, which is at the center of this discipline, human, right? The man or the human being. This is the focus of the discipline. So perhaps anthropology can be a great tool for negotiation between the different communities. If there's questions popping up, because I can see some chat stuff happening, if you could please hang on till the end of the talk, I would be very grateful, and I would love to hear your questions and comments. So if you have any specific questions to what I've just said or anything additional, I would be grateful if you could wait. Okay, and back to the positionality and my means with that book. I wanted to also initiate a dialogue with the huge, ginormous body of work that we have, literature that we have, that describes the lives of Tibetan Buddhist saints, but sort of takes the lives for granted. So we're just saying Lama X was born there and he displayed miraculous signs, and then he taught disciples, and then he also passed away among miraculous signs. Also, recently we have a lot of biographies of female teachers. But anyway, still, I would love I would love us to go into depth and to understand why and how are these people becoming saints, so to speak, and collecting students and inspiring. And these books, we all read these books as scholars because these are also our sources of information. We read those books and are inspired by them as Buddhist practitioners. Yeah, so why not have these two spheres talk to one another? I think it's about time. Okay, and also, as Isabel has beautifully introduced my scholarly interests, I am really interested in intersections of tradition and contemporary belonging. And that is a wide interest. It goes wider than just Tibet. So right now I'm living in Canada. I'm interested in the so-called First Nations or Native Canadians, how they define themselves today, looking at their tradition. I look at my own native Poland and the way people are living with the different traditions right now. So that's what's interesting to me, and more generally. Okay, so now the story of this book. How did it come about? I want to see if I can change the slide. Yeah, why don't I change the slide? This is obviously La Segunda. This is level 1, as I call it. This is where the Dokang, or the 3-year retreat enclosure, is, and some of the other advanced booths or cabins for advanced meditation. I'll come back to that. But just to give you a few words on how this book came about, because the story is also interesting. So in 2006, I was enrolled as a doctoral student at the Humboldt University in Berlin. My mentor and supervisor he's still my mentor, but my supervisor at the time was Tony Huber, the fantastic, famous, amazing scholar of Tibetan societies. And he suggested to me that I should venture outside of, the textual realm that I was very much devoted to back then, and basically asked me if I would be interested to do that. And I knew from his work and from his field work and from his wife Mona Schrempf's work and from the work of other scholars that there's a huge revival of Buddhism happening in ethnic Tibet. And so I became really interested in that. But we know ethnic Tibet is a huge, gigantic territory. So how to zone in on that, I started thinking about this. And then I thought about Jeffrey Samuel, who's part of my academic lineage too, because he was the supervisor of Tony Huber. So I thought about his book, which I love, Civilized Shamans, and how he writes about Kam. And I was intrigued. And also, as a Buddhist practitioner, I'm affiliated with lineages, with practice lineages, specifically with the Kajupa that has grown and flourished within Kam. So I also had a personal investment to go to look there. And then Tony Huber loaned me his copy of a text called The List of the 25 Holy Places or Sacred Places of Kam and Amdo. And it's a very interesting text. And I read in this text how Chogyur Lingpa, the Tertun, the treasure founder from the 19th century, who was part of the revivalist triad of the Rime triad, how he promoted Kam, Eastern Tibet, to this landscape where Guru Rinpoche also, so Padmasambhava, the famous legendary master, who was credited for bringing Buddhism to Tibet. And so how Kam is being promoted to this sacred territory. And so I hypothesized that maybe some of these sacred spots might be revived today. I didn't have a way to prove to check that because that was just, we didn't have any publications back there. The internet was not where it's at today. So I just had to risk. In 2007 was a reconnaissance expedition. So in 2007, I surveyed Kam together with two friends, and we visited 7 of the places mentioned in Chogyur Lingpa's list of the 25 sites, always on the lookout for active meditation venues. In and around those 7 sacred sites, we encountered, or in and around 7 sacred sites from Chogyur Lingpa's list, we encountered 17 hermitages, from solitary caverns like the Practice Cave at Pema Shirpuk in Dege County, sealed huts above Kangne Monastery around Sharda in Nongchen County, to collective retreats such as Kage or Kamontaktsan in Dege area. The meditation school of Lhasa that I selected to serve as the case study for my dissertation lies adjacent to 2 venues at Chodrak named at the very beginning of Chogyur Lingpa's list. And from the very beginning of my first journey across Eastern Tibet, which is Kam, for those of you who are not familiar with Tibetan studies, Kam is sort of the way that, or maybe the other way around, Eastern Tibet is the way we refer to the area known as Kam. I was struck by the rapidly expanding phenomenon of meditation training in a collective setting that was in semi-independence or total autonomy from the local monastery. I noticed a pattern repeated all throughout the Tibetan areas of Sichuan and Qinghai, large settlements of ordained people, either men or women, sometimes both, but obviously separated, living an ascetic life in a remote environment, focused around the presence of a religious leader whose specialty was instruction in one of the Buddhist meditation lineages. And later I learned that Antonio Terone, he saw the same thing, he saw the same pattern, and 3 years before me, he published his dissertation, which picks up on exactly the same trend, and we even intersected in some of the places we saw. Okay, and my notes said I should go back to slide 4, which I'm wondering, I guess that's slide 4. Okay, so among the examples of retreat settlements I visited in 2007, Lhasa was the most accessible to me and the most suitable for an exploration of its interiority. It was also fascinating that this meditation training complex encompasses 3 different types of retreat. The first is Gomda, the meditation school, characterized by a non-commitment policy, open to people, in this case women, with or without prior religious education, who are prepared to take monastic ordination on the spot or are already ordained. And now the other types of retreat. I already showed you what I call level 1 in my book. This is above the Gomda, the main Gomda area. It hosts the Lama's cabin and other for most advanced practices, for instance, Yidam or the Tumo yoga, Tumo or the so-called inner heat meditation, for which Tsultim Tachin, the master of this place, is most famous for. And another type of retreat practiced here is the 3-year seclusion in the ritually sealed enclosure of the Dukang. The Dukang is what you see here painted in red, right in the center of this photograph. It's a walled-in U-shaped enclosure open to no one other than a meditation instructor and a caretaker. Between 2007 and 8, it accommodated solely male meditators. So this was a place for monks. And oh yeah, these are some of the booths for individual retreat on level 1. But a third type of meditation training, solitary retreat, is for advanced practitioners. This is mostly for Yidam practice. And this photograph is etched into my heart. I have it on my desktop since it was taken in 2007. All the time. I just love this photograph, and I have a subchapter in my book devoted just to this type of cabins. So because it's a stunning example of ascetic life. This is a miniature hut. You should know that it's so tiny you can just crawl in here. It's not a full-sized house. It's perched on a perimeter of a cliff. The hut overlooks the hills and valleys below. Its walls are a mere meter long, built from stones mixed with mortar in the manner of local houses. The cabin is equipped with a tiny door painted white and a large front window with a single glass pane. The flat roof is decorated with a string of prayer flags, that's in front, in the bright colors of the 5 Buddha families. The only way to enter this tiny structure is to crawl in. Once inside, the minute hut encapsulates the body of the meditator entirely, inflecting it into the cross-legged meditation posture. The head may touch the ceiling, the wall almost meets the kneecaps. A sheepskin is laid out on the cold stone floor, and images of lamas and tantric deities decorate the wall. Much more than its use as a dwelling, the cabin like this would be made to be donned like an ascetic robe. At the same time, the hut is an andragogical device in itself. The complete reductionism teaches the total experience of renunciation and is a catalyst that produces a variety of ontological and cosmological meanings. As the hut and the body become one, the ascetic delineates the territory where a new culture is formed. Of these 3 types of retreat, Drukang, individual huts, and the Gomda, most of the data I managed to collect for this book deals with the open life, the open sphere of the Gomda. Because the booths like this for the solitary retreat were not occupied in either 2007 and 8, but even if they had been in use, another issue is reflected in the inaccessibility of the Drukang, is also reflected in the inaccessibility of the Drukang. Tantric meditation emphasizes confidentiality that conceals virtually everything: the meditation technique, ritual scriptures, ceremonial utensils or substances used, and the body of the meditator, and also the subjective inner experiences. So even with the privileges I enjoyed as a participant observer, there was only one way into a booth like this or the Drukang, committing to the 3-year period of intense meditation training in a sealed compound. Doing this would have automatically brought my academic pursuit to an end. So in anthropology, we talk about a lot about the principle of reciprocity. Well, I was very limited in my ways to show reciprocity to the people I worked with because they weren't hugely interested in my academic endeavors. And yeah, I just could not commit to a 3-year retreat. I couldn't, and I didn't want to. So there you go. Okay, another slide. Okay, so there are multiple and overlapping ritual boundaries in La Segunda. Some are related to the radically ascetic lifestyle. So, for example, lay people cannot just come by. They have to have a reason to approach and enter the Gomda. there is a monastery below, as I mentioned, below Lhasa. This place is very different from the monastery in operation. And so Lhasa Gumda wants to be differentiated. The master himself, other informants have emphasized this. So there are these kind of symbolic, unseen boundaries. But this picture shows a physical boundary maker. So I was very happy to find that as well. To show just how the complexity of those boundaries. So that's why it's interesting to me. This little plaque, you can say, is placed right next to the drukang, so the 3-year enclosure on level 1. And of course, any drukang has its own very strict ritual boundaries, which is the walls. It's very walls, because no one can enter except for the meditation instructor and except for the so-called drubyok, or the meditation, or the helper, retreat helper, who cooks and brings in the fuel. But there's an additional marker for all those invisible energies that are not supposed to come in behind this border. So this this is extra protection, so that the monks inside can be undisturbed, and it calls upon Guru Dorje Drukpo, which is a special aspect of Padmasambhava, which is believed to have appeared at Lapchi to protect the meditators. Okay, and by the way, once I'm showing the photo, if there's no credit shown, like here you can see that Franz Eder, a friend of mine, made this photo. That means I made the photo. So just it's in case you were wondering. And I want to give credit to all my friends who made the photo. So Franz Eder and Xavier Hasenbusch was another very important person in terms of photography. They were not connected to the ethnography as such. They had their own goals and their own sort of agenda in visiting those places. We had some of this stuff in common, because we are Buddhist practitioners and a part of the same network, Buddhist network. But yeah, I was engaged in my scholarly stuff as well, and they were engaged in just exploration. And I guess they should be asked to explain what their goals were. So I don't want to speak for them, but I just want to acknowledge the photographs. Okay, and to those of you out there who are not familiar with the Buddhist revival, some people come to me and say, "Oh, this is interesting. We heard that, once China took over in 1951, and especially after 58, that everything was destroyed, and now there's not much left, Buddhism left in Tibet." Well, this is not the case, and with the end of the Cultural Revolution in 1976, reforms of Mao's successor Deng Xiaoping raised hopes for religious and economic liberties for all China's citizens. So not only Tibetans, but many Tibetans welcomed the possibility to openly practice religion again. And this is still seen as sort of lack of thankfulness and understanding on the part of the Tibetan minority by the government and by components of Chinese society, who see that as a failed civilization project, that Tibetans are still falling into their own quote unquote superstition, their old ways. And this is changing. We now have other components of Chinese society who are very excited, extremely excited by Tibetan Buddhism, and who are participating, not just as donors, but even, for instance, in Lhasa, there's Han Chinese monks nowadays too. So this is changing, but I just want to mention that the bigger social trends. And so since the new policies also allowed the decollectivization of land, this allowed for rapid economic development, and people had now a surplus of money to spend. They used it generously to rebuild the destroyed monasteries and hermitages, construct new ones, support local lamas in their activities, and provide for their monastic family members. And we have a huge literature now on the ethno-religious revival, because these things come hand in hand: the ethnic revival of the culture itself, and then the specifically religious one. Okay. And the revivalist movement has involved monastics and lay persons alike, aiming at a religious renewal. At the same time, it has fueled an ethnic reinvigoration of local cultures and historical identities. It's also interlinked with the the global religion market, because Tibetan Buddhism is a global religion today, and people from abroad, so not only Chinese people who come and visit these places like Lhasa itself, and they do, if they're allowed in, of course, but there's also people from the so-called West who can come in and join and participate. So not only me as a scholar, but I know several of my friends were able to come in and visit the main Lama. The post-Mao revival is additionally reminiscent of the Rime movement. So the one that I mentioned in the beginning as sort of helping, because I studied some of the Rime, it helped to generate hypotheses of where to go and come and where to zone in on those places. Because the lamas today are quoting Rime, they're quoting Rime scholars and lamas literally, and they're quoting them figuratively. Through non-sectarian collaboration and restoration of meditation venues and other places elevated in the 19th century, such as the practice caves around Chodrak that opened the list of the 25 sites. So very, very close to Lhasa Gonda. Okay, and let's talk about sainthood and asceticism now. Okay. So I would like to start discussing the content of this book by bringing up two key terms that I was using, saint-making or sainthood and asceticism. Oh, and also charisma obviously would be like an extension of the term saint-making. So what you see here are screenshots from a web page whose address you can see below, baromkaji.org. I accessed it literally a few days ago. So I didn't give you a date, but it's fresh. You can still see it there. And you can see the main Lama of Lhasa Gonda, Tsutin Daltin, depicted here, and another local Lama. And this is a quote. This is not, the orange text is not mine. You can see that both of these Lamas are considered living saints. So that's intriguing already at the start. That, because this webpage was made for the transnational Barong Kagyu community, spanning Malaysia, Kham, Vietnam, Australia, and it originates with a Chodrak Lama who is now based in Australia, I believe. The page mentions the religious history of the area, sacred geography, and most notable lamas, and this is what you find. You can find Tsotim Trachin there as the local treasure, so to speak, or one of these local treasures. So there is some emic discourse, which is informed by the transnational needs and global Buddhism, but they're already using the term saints. So that's intriguing. But of course, I wanted to go beyond that, and because this is addressed as a rather popular audience, scholarship on Buddhism has widely adopted the term saint as a descriptor of ideal types across Buddhist traditions, in doctrinal analysis of textual material, and even in some other studies. Referring to exemplary Buddhists as saints has become commonplace in discussions and case studies from India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, China, and Tibet. And we have a multitude of books that use this terminology already right at the start in the title. But just as it's easy to locate a study on Buddhist saints across cultural contexts, it's difficult to locate a source that devotes room for a differentiated discussion of this label beyond the Christian context. So this begs a question to me. Is the case for a Buddhist sainthood merely a colonial relic from the time of the Orientalists in the likes of Charles de Bernard-Mills' exposition of the Buddha and the Theosophist takes on Milarepa, for instance, Evans Wentz, who also called Milarepa a saint? The ubiquitous application of sainthood in academic writings mentioned here coincides with the deficiency in theoretical underpinnings. Perhaps scholars of the post-colonial turn favor sainthood, though variously defined, for its claim to universalist discussions of an exemplary life across different emic ideals. In this sense, I agree with the religionists who dare to compare. It's a quote from a colleague called Brian Siebeking. Striving for a much needed conceptual creativity and collaborative inclusivity, likewise a quote from Siebeking, between students of different religious traditions in pursuit of a comparative hagiography, or hagiology rather, sorry. And this is another quote Moreover, it is not my intention to distance my argument from Christian references. On the contrary, with the added benefit of cross-references to the abundant Christian histories and theological considerations, this book argues for sainthood as an efficient concept that encapsulates both the process of saint-making and its product, studied in their contemporary context. The social dynamics around the making of saints and their cults, together with their miraculously transformed bodies and paradigmatic life, are superbly characterized in late medieval European hagiographic tradition. The official recognition of sainthood by the Church rested on an individual's capacity to lead an exemplary life, virtus morum in Latin, and to exhibit signs, virtus signorum. That is the power to work miracles, and Aviad Kleinberg has written on that. I'm quoting him here. Strikingly, the interdependence of virtus morum and virtus signorum distinguishes many Tibetan Buddhist figures, including Tsotim Tarchin, the main protagonist of this study. His life is claimed to epitomize Buddhist principles, and he is believed to have possessed superhuman abilities. As such, he has become an object of worship and imitation. Although Tibetans do not employ canons or recognition procedures for the emergence of new saints, obviously, but saint-making very much involves the established hierarchy. The approval and endorsement of local reincarnate lamas or monastic abbots is crucial for new saints and their cults to unfold on a wider scale of operation and thus create broader social impact. Yeah, I was able to look at two sort of emerging sainthood figures in Kham. One was Tsotim Tachi, another one was a local lama elsewhere who didn't have monastic institutional recognition, and their field of reach, their charisma, their operations were very different. And the other lama who was not recognized, he was very limited in scope. So I do believe that just by this anecdotal sort of evidence, I do believe that it's important. And then there's whole charisma on how, then there's whole discussion on how charisma is actually allowed and encouraged to operate within Tibetan Buddhism, which I won't have time for, but just a little bit, maybe a little bit later on. Drawing on a broad comparative idea of sainthood allows us to explore the social and religious dimensions of lives devoted to the Buddhist quest toward enlightenment and the charismatic activity of their masters. Additionally, of the masters. Additionally, I propose to see sainthood as the cult of living masters who model enlightened action in the world in alignment with the Bodhisattva ideal in Mahayana Buddhism. In contemporary Kham, lay people and monastics often refer to masters of meditation and miracles like Tsotim Tachi as Drupdop. Drupdop is a Tibetan rendering of the Sanskrit siddha, one accomplished or perfected in the course of Tantra practice. This moniker, known among literate Tibetans from translations of Indic sources, has clearly developed a vernacular dimension. As such, it would be tempting to use it as a descriptor for Tsotim Tarchin's religious status, but that would not allow me to talk to, in this book, to other scholars, other Buddhist studies scholars and the wider public. So I settled for sainthood. So that's my explanation. Now about asceticism. Asceticism in my discussion is defined as a performance of renunciation, self-formation, and emulation. It takes place in a social setting and with a transhuman reference point. It is carried out to induce change in self and society by means of ritual discipline and in demonstration of its soteriological efficacy. I do want to mention that because I know that there's trends in anthropology to discuss any contemporary phenomena that has to do with some kind of microculture and social order and some form of discipline, self-imposed discipline as asceticism. And I find them interesting. But so, for instance, I know that people have discussed, scholars have discussed, gym goers or, how do you call this? People who, put on a lot of muscle as an ascetic culture. I find that interesting and intriguing, but my asceticism is obviously different. So my ascetics, they are ascetics because they relate to a numinous other So something transhuman other than themselves, and that's the most important thing in their asceticism. And other similarities could be there, but that's the most important thing. The emic concept of katup, enduring hardship, embraces not only the intentional aspect of the Greek root askein, to exercise, but also connotations of ascesis as the endurance of pain and discomfort. However, for Tibetan Buddhists, enduring hardship is not intended as a mortification of the body. Austerity is, first and foremost, a product of isolation and the key condition for successful meditation training. The renunciation of social bonds and a life above the level of everyday economy lead to a scarcity of food and medicine, absence of human support, inhospitable weather conditions, and feral animals. Life in the wilderness is hard. When the cave is wet, even lighting a fire may pose a great challenge. Katup is first of all the stoic attitude to adversities and withstanding them with patience. Kshanti, one of the virtues of Mahayana Buddhism. Employing language associated with Tantra as it's used in the hermitages, Katup is the readiness to transform suffering into a means on the path toward perfection or enlightenment. But what is the meaning behind the intentional trials that Tibetan practitioners engage in when living an ascetic life? Celibacy is probably the most common example of renunciation, but it's not, of course, it's not restricted to hermitism. So I don't discuss this in my book. I'm not particularly interested in that. But other intentional austerities widespread among Tibetan hermits are pauperism and fasting. Also behaviors that are very similar to the early Buddhist and Theravada practices of Dutaguna, in Pali Dutanga, can be very common. These practices are exemplified by a total or partial abstinence from the comfort of reclining the body to rest at night. Dwelling in the open air or tying one's hair to a nail fixed to a ceiling are also practices encountered in narratives of past ascetic saints, which I've also heard being revived today. So that's fascinating. In the Tibetan context, the intentionality of self-denial is contextualized in the traditional narrative of the Buddha, who gave his disciple the voluntary dutagunas for the purposes of purifying the body and cultivating the contentedness with little, detachment, energy, and moderation. This is a quote from Boswell and Lopez from the wonderful Dictionary of Buddhism you can't stop using. I think it's brilliant. This book examines how Eastern Tibetan hermits are challenging their bodies and minds by applying the power of ascetic discipline. We accompany them in their journey as they align their body-mind complex with specific points on the path toward liberation and enlightenment in emulation of their guru and the paradigmatic Tibetan hermit Milarepa, whom you see depicted here. This is a photo from the field from the Chodrak Tower. They have a tower built as a quote and a nod, and obviously also invoking the blessing of Milarepa from his biography, where he was made to build towers and then take them down, etc. And so there are beautiful sculptures inside, and this is, of course, on the very top floor. Milarepa's single undyed cotton robe stands for his renunciation of corporeal comfort and worldly concerns. At the same time, it stands for the power of yogic attainment. Especially today, the white robe of the ascetic displays the force of tradition and the continued authority of religion in a secularized world. In this book, asceticism is discussed as a quest for purity and power. And I also owe a lot to Nicolas Hillet. I don't know if he's here today. I can't see all the participants, but he published quite a lot on this topic, on this sort of dichotomy, but also not so much dichotomy that we have in Tibetan Buddhism, and how purity and power are the two themes that speak to one another. Furthermore, the practices that are part and parcel of the ascetic life, withstanding the cold, hunger, sickness, loneliness, are the more purposeful acts of self-denial, and the more purposeful acts of self-denial, like fasting, sleeping in a seated position, share a notably performative aesthetic with some of the early Syriac Christian saints like Simeon the Stylite who spent much of his life dwelling in a pillar. And we can learn a lot of these fascinating figures from theorists of asceticism like Edith Vishgorod, Jeffrey Harpham, Wimbush and Valentassus, Flood, and historians of Christianity, Patricia Cox Miller, particularly, etc. These scholars acknowledge the performative ways in which ascetics use their bodies. Some theorists also examined the social implications of this performativity. So this is where I'm going in the book. The performative angle in my analysis of Tibetan ascetic regimes is founded in theories of ritual, as mentioned after Turner and Bell, and inspired by the application of Turnerian concepts into theater studies. I'm talking about Richard Schechner, who was the disciple, the student of Victor Turner, and who, of course, founded theater studies or performance studies. As Gavin Flood remarks, the solitary and clandestine practices of ascetics should be seen as broader social performances in the sense that they act out the recollection of tradition by means of the body. So the case study studied in this book illustrates the performativity inherent to Tibetan hermitic practices and lives. It shows that the hermit's solitary existence and the secrecy of the practices emphasize an intentional visibility, which is perhaps a paradox inherent in the ascetic imperative itself, as some theorists suppose. And I will cut down on other explanations here and just go on with the slides because I'm looking at the time. I know that Natalia very generously remarked that I'm not obligated to stay within the hour, but we have to move on with our lives at a certain point. So in the interest of that, okay, so I'm just going to say, as I mentioned already, for every performance, even the most secret one, even when the meditator is walled in and doesn't see anybody and the meals are given to them through an opening in the wall, or they look for their own food, this is a performance. And for every performance, there is an audience. And this is how I build my arguments in the book. Okay, this is why I chose to give you this quote from Bugya Tsigtso of all places, so from a dictionary, Chinese Tibetan dictionary of all places, and not some maybe scripture, religious scripture, is that because it contains a super interesting reference to Milarepa. It says, because he performed meditation with extreme courage and in an ascetic manner, he achieved supreme realization in that very body and life, okay? Kutse denila. So that's super, when I saw this phrase the first time, really rang a lot of bells in my head because, you know, I think it shows a very promising perspective, analytical perspective for some anthropology to come in and for some tools and methods and theories to help us understand asceticism and define saint-making, define charisma in Tibetan societies. Okay, so let's go to the main protagonist. So Kama Tsutim Tachin. To my knowledge today, he is still alive. And so his life story is an open narrative. And there is no written hagiography as far as I know. Yeah, so this is based on his life story was collected based on some oral histories, emic storytelling, and his own performance of sainthood. He was born in 1947 as a child. He was a child during the incorporation of Eastern Tibetan polities into China and forced collectivization. He was said to have been a very compassionate child, but religious expression was banned. And so for the first 4 decades of his life, he lived as a householder and village official. By the way, being 40 when one renounces life and gets ordained is also a quote to Milarepa or from Milarepa. So a lot of his life is just quoting from Milarepa's hagiography. Tsultim Tachin encountered his guru Karma Norbu, whom you can see in this kind of interesting tanka or picture, electronic picture made to look like a tanka on the left. So he's here on the top right. He was called the second Milarepa, Milanipa in his own right during his lifetime. And you have Milarepa, the historical Milarepa, on the top left. So Tsutim Tachin encountered Karma Norbu in the late 1980s during the start of the Dengis reforms. And the fact that, I just want to mention this, something very obvious, but rarely stated. So the fact that masters like Karma Norbu biologically survived the Cultural Revolution, all the violence, that he survived also ritually intact, which was mentioned by his students, and did not escape into exile, that he stayed back in calm, is it's rather crucial to the revival today, because of embodiment as a crucial aspect. So, okay, Tsukim Tachin took monastic ordination, went into closed retreat. After that, he joined Saje Rinpoche, the abbot of nearby monastery, Chodrak Monastery of the Barum Kaju school, and one of the most prominent disciples of Karma Norbu himself as well. On a pilgrimage to central Tibet, they developed a relationship which became central to Tsutim Tachin's recognition and activity, because so Saje Rinpoche presented the white robe to Tsultim Tachin so that he can wear it in recognition of his tumo, or inner heat meditation accomplishment. And Tsultim Tachin chose to wear this robe as the only robe. So he completely renounced his maroon red monastic robes and chose to only wear this robe. And that's interesting to me, because even dusting off Max Weber's ideas on charisma, which are quite outdated, but we can see that they do form a nice starting point for our discussions on charisma, because, for instance, he said something interesting when he stated that charisma starts in a claim to charismatic authority. So in my eyes, I think that this claim on Tsutim Tachin's side was his decision to wear that white robe only, because that made him into the third Milarepa. And that's also more complex than that, because through this white robe, he is structuring his charisma. He is he's quoting a lot more than that. He's quoting the local narrative on Nangchen as the land of meditators. Is being revived today. He's quoting the Barumpa patriarchs, the yogins who flew across the Lasi landscape before it became a hermitage. Many centuries prior to that, he's quoting, his own Lama, the second Milarepa. He's quoting Milarepa himself. So there's a lot of meaning stuck into this, which this robe encompasses, and not just encompasses. I really think in structureless ways here, I really think that this robe structures those meanings. It creates like layers and shows how this man progressed from a very ordinary person and a cadre at his local commune, people's commune. He was responsible for work points during the Cultural Revolution. Then he became interested in religion. He became a very pious layman. Then he became a monk. Then he became a renunciate hermit. And then he became the second Milarepa, who can transmit an authentic tumo transmission, even with all the changes and ruptures, cultural ruptures and violence that happened through the Cultural Revolution today. I have a lot of slides still and a lot of content, but I'm looking at the watch, and I think, you know what, I would love to hear from your questions and comments, because I could still go on. I was actually thinking I don't have enough content to fill an hour, but I can see I have way more than enough. So I'm happy to stop here and take any questions or comments from you. And if I could ask you, Natalia, or you, Isabel, or anybody to unmute themselves and read them out, I would be very thankful, because I can't access the chat panel.
Maria, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It was very, very personal, which I really appreciated. It makes this work, in my eyes, it makes this work very precious when you take your heart and you put it into something like that. So thank you so much. Yes, the time, but we have also started a little bit later, so I don't think it's not your fault, definitely. We can start the Q&A session. We had more participants actually, but some of them have just left. So I guess those were who had just 1 hour.
Right.
And I think I would switch to gallery because otherwise I don't see people who would like to ask questions. Anyone?
Natalia,
Yes.
just before you organize the Q&A, I see here a function to quit the screen sharing to force, let's say, Maria to do it from here. Yes. Oh, you managed to do it yourself. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So this is perfect now.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
please go.
Yes, now I can see people. So if there is anyone who would like to start with the first question, please. Otherwise, Isabel? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I have many, but I'm just breaking the ice now. Thank you very much. It's a very exciting piece of research. So I'll just ask one question and then let's see how it goes for everyone else. About asceticism. So if I understood you correctly, it's really about enduring hardship on the body, unless I misunderstood what you said, in order to cultivate the mind, probably. Are there any specific practices, like, for example, Chulkor, so yoga, or Lujong, maybe a kind of other version, to train the body to endure those hardships? Or not? Well, okay, I'll leave the question there. And then a sub-question to that is, are there different qualities to sainthood? Like this, what is the Tibetan equivalent that you would be looking at? And is the quote and unquote sainthood of a Neljorpa the same in quality as that of a Lama, as that of a Chulku, or do their specific practices and life paths endow them with specific qualities of sainthood?
Okay. Great questions. Thank you so much, Isabel. Yeah, and thank you for everyone for staying on and enduring all of this and getting us happily to the Q&A. And for Natalia, for your very touching comment. I kind of went out on the limb and revealed so much about my positionality, but I thought it's important because this work is personal, because only through my, revealing my positionality and kind of positioning myself in certain ways could I gain access to this very clandestine and field. So yeah, I think it belongs there. That piece belongs there. We deserve to know how this was collected. This data was collected. Okay, so now back to Isabel's questions. Are there any? So you asked about Trukor. I'm not familiar with Lujong in particular, so it might have something to do with a tradition I haven't studied. So sorry about that, but I can speak to Trukor, definitely. Which is a way for those of you I can now see who's here, and I know there's at least one person who is outside of the academic and Tibetan Buddhist field, so study field. So this refers to training of the body in yogic ways, breathing postures, sitting to kind of manipulate the energy to flow in specific ways to help with meditation and of course towards enlightenment. And there's for sure better definitions than this one, but this is the one I could come up with on the spot, so please bear with me. Okay, so if asceticism encompasses any of that, yes, the short answer is yes. And thank you for asking this, because my definition I can see now that I showed you here was rather incomplete, because what I'm also talking about in my book is asceticism has two aspects for me and for what you can see in the field really and in this material. One is the negating aspect. It's the renunciation. You renounce the world. So for instance, renouncing family, renouncing ordinary life, and living in a remote place, and renouncing entertainment, jewelry, things like that. There's specific vows to take sometimes with that. But there's also a positive aspect to renunciation. The most obvious one of which has to do with the adoption of training and discipline. And this adoption of training and discipline has closely to do with the lineage, ritual lineage one is being trained in. So the particular Gema, or how they refer to the nuns up there, as Katie Fitzgerald will also know. So the Gema, the nuns, are not trained in Trukor, unless it's specifically geared towards their specific instructions on the 6 yogas and Tumo, so the inner heat meditation. But I wasn't a part of that because that's secret. When I was getting my own explanations, they were my own. Some of these instructions are also separated because because of this confidentiality and secrecy between the teacher and the student. Some of the explanations are shared though. So I don't know about this particular ritual, Isabel, if you're interested in that in particular. But yes, there is a positive aspect of adopting discipline, and that's hugely important. There's also other positive aspects because it's, because renunciation is supposed to lead toward liberation and enlightenment, it has these kind of positive aspects also in society, where people support the ascetic, because this is their kind of local investment, local group investment towards that goal, that common goal. Your other question about specific sainthood models, a very interesting one too, on whether Nagelpa or Lama or Truku or the reincarnate Lama, and if there's sort of specific sainthood models, I do think there are some, and that's also, I mean, in Tibetan Buddhism, we're always very much there's these inflections that are aligned with the respective ritual tradition. So I'm sure there are some. And for instance, but Nerjupa, this is something that my book speaks to. Nerjupa, or yogi, this translation of the Sanskrit yogi, or yogin. This would be like a broader path, and the path of the yogi is often defined in emic terms as the path of someone who's just a renunciant. So no matter which ritual tradition they subscribe to, they will be a renunciant yogi living high up in the mountains above a domestic economy. They won't have anything to do with the outside world, and they will just focus on meditation, so their discipline of the mind and body, and through that they will accomplish enlightenment. When it comes to the reincarnate Lama, this is really interesting because what I think we can see through this material is that because Tutin Tachin was not born into a Tulku lineage, he was not considered a reincarnate Lama. He's still not considered a reincarnate Lama to my information today. And it looks like this path of the Najupa, of the yogi, opens the back door to religious hierarchy and becoming a saint very officially within Tibetan Buddhism without the credentials of a reincarnate Lama. When it comes to other models, I would love to see a study, and it would be great to collaborate with someone who knows a lot about, for instance, Ngakpa, right? So mantrins, which is another fascinating model of religious practice and life in Tibetan Buddhism, which is also revived today. And I'm sure if it's Nicolas Sile or Antonio Terone who have studied this phenomenon could speak to that. I happen to think that some people in some of the Buddhist networks represented around the world are kind of like Western equivalents of the Ngakpas. I see myself very much as a Western Ngakma, if I may say that. So maybe I could also participate in those discussions. Anyway, it's that I think that warrants for a bigger discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Isabel, for your question. There is a comment in the chat, so I think we should go with it. I would read it out. Both Buddhism and Christianity discourage self-promotion as a saint. Christianity requires legitimation by an external authority after death. Buddhism mostly verifies sainthood based on signs at death. How do these methods of judging sainthood, death, signs compare?
Oh yeah, great question. Thank you. So yeah, very often we have in the hagiographies of lamas that so disciples talk about death, and this is like the final sign, virtus signorum. As we brought up the example from scholarship of medieval Christianity, this is the final sign of the body that somebody's accomplished and that they can now be revered in the Buddhist pantheon. However, I think from social practice, we can safely say that sainthood is a social phenomenon that happens with living people, like can surround living individuals. So very much like Tsotim Tachin, and there's a ton of other examples, including reincarnate lamas. The reincarnate lamas, I think, would be a prime example of that, where we could use the label of a saint, and they're living people. When it comes to the self-promotional element of your question, yes, absolutely, and thank you for that question. I didn't have time to remark that I'm not. So when I'm saying, we're talking about saints and performativity of sainthood, I'm not insinuating that any of this is put on for show, or that any of these people are kind of crafting their image like some people do on social media, that it's some sort of form of, self-promotion. In no way. Absolutely, I didn't find that in the material, and I would not be claiming that ever, having lived with those people and having met this Lama. My claim with the performativity had to do more with the fact that this is a great tool to study living saints, so to speak, and how sainthood plays out in the social field. And also that, yeah, performativity. So it's not about anything artificial here. I'm not insinuating that, or I didn't hear anyone do it, maybe except for for the odd, strange book about the Dalai Lama, whose authors I think it was Tremondi were the authors, who wrote terrible things about the Dalai Lama, but I don't think anybody's taking this book seriously in 2025 anymore. I'm sorry. Anyway, so yeah, not talking about anything artificial or anything put on for show. It's more about it, more in the Turnerian tradition of the social drama in general. So in life, we all play roles. Yeah, we all play roles. This is why I was talking about my own roles that I play and my positionality in the field. I am this, I am that, and how that plays out in field work, in the ethnography. We all have different roles to play. We are, mothers and daughters and fathers and friends, and all of these are social roles. And if you take the performativity lens to look at asceticism as well, you will see some striking things, like the fact that lamas and these people who craft their charisma, they're very conscious of the way that charisma can be, of the influence that they can have by saying things or acting in a specific way or putting on a certain robe. And I'm not saying that they're doing this also with a bad motivation. All I'm saying is that there is intentionality behind it, and that they're hoping to attract disciples and communicate their understanding of the teachings, and their understanding of, of their state of mind where they're at. So this is called upaya kaushalya, in Sanskrit. So the skill and means, where the Lama is given basically poetic license to go out and create his charisma and create his own ways of communicating with his disciples. I don't know if that answers your question. If not, I'm just gonna display maybe my email address for you guys. If it's not in the announcement, I don't know, Natalia, did we have my email address in the announcement?
No, I'm not so sure, but maybe you can send it in the chat here.
Exactly, and I can just share my screen also. That would, again, I think that's the easiest way. If we have the time to take one last question, then I'm ready for you. I'm just trying to figure out the technology here.
I'm not sure if it's one question or more. Does anyone else would like to ask a question? Cyprien Basso says that he had a similar question about performativity, and so he already got his answer. If no one else is asking a question, I would like to ask a question. First of all, I was curious, what did it take? How did you become a Kamo? I'm just, very.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the non-Tibet scholar folks out there, so Kamo is a woman from Kham, woman from Eastern Tibet. You know, Natalia, I think I just kind of nominated myself too much here. I don't think I ever become one. I think I'm on the path of becoming one. I'm partially one. It's a question of hybridity and positionality again. We are coming back to that again. No, I'm just personally invested in this area, which I think is absolutely amazing and underrepresented in scholarship in terms of, religious history, in terms of secular history. We have clans who are ruling this place, and it's super fascinating to see the models of power. And the official Chinese scholarship is kind of bludgeoning it down to and reducing it down to some local clan headmen and stuff like that. But it's not that simple, and we have fascinating models like kingship happening in Nangqian and in other places like in Eastern Tibet. Also, what else is fabulous and fascinating for people like myself, that this is where the practice lineages flourished, sometimes even originated. So we Buddhist practitioners owe a lot to these places. They're virtually holy places for us. And so for me also to go to do an ethnography is a part of me goes and does a pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage for me as well. It's a kora practice, definitely. So I'm full of reverence to those places. So that's my story in brief.
No, that's exactly what I was curious about. And also, I was wondering, maybe I didn't hear it, or maybe you didn't mention it. This kind of phenomena of the development of meditation centers outside the monasteries, which is in Eastern Tibet. Is there a similar movement in other parts of Tibet, for example, or do you connect this to the fact that the Rime movement started in Eastern Tibet, so it's more prominent? It's more prominent, yeah, to this area.
Thank you, Natalia. So first of all, I must reveal my ignorance. I'm not hugely I'm not hugely competent on anything that's outside of Kham. I have been to Amdo and I've seen places, and I know some scholarship about Amdo. So I know that Amdo has some sort of beyond monastic religious culture also, which is quite strong. And many of our colleagues, right, work in Amdo, and Isabel has worked there too, and Katja Buffetril has, and many other colleagues have gone there and done field work on many valuable religious fields. So I know that the revival is happening there. I've also gone to places where I thought I might, do field work. When it comes to or Central Tibet, I don't know, and I would be surprised if there was a lot happening just because of the political restrictions of this, geographic part of ethnic Tibet. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? Isabel and Jakub as well.
Oh, but please, Jakub, you go first.
I would say you go first. I have actually stupid questions, so if you don't get to them, it's all right.
There's no stupid question. Okay, so I'll just ask mine. You spoke a lot about revival and portrayed the vibrancy of religious practice there in a very positive light. I was curious if you have been able to go back since your PhD fieldwork, or if you're in connection still somehow with the people there, if you have updates on how this community or this line of practice is doing under the Sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism by the current government and policy. Do you have any update on the contemporary situation?
Thank you. So I don't have the most recent update. My last visit in the field was 2015, and I even think that this photo stems from 2015. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, because there's a lot of cabins. So 2015, and I've been in touch with the field via Chinese social media because there's a Chinese monk there who stays there, and I don't know if he's there now, but he's a very close disciple of Lama Tsotim Tarchin in the Tibetan tradition and in the ritual tradition that Lama Tsotim Tarchin teaches. So everything was evolving very positively. When it comes to syncretization, I'm wondering if the many, how that speaks to the fact that we have a lot of Han Chinese monks in Tibetan robes in the Tibetan tradition who live in these places now and who require some catering done to them because they only speak Chinese. So this is sort of happening, but it's more of a grassroots thing. I'm wondering if it's completely disattached from the government policy and the increasing pressure from the above, and it perhaps is because many of those people I've met and I know, and they're very genuine in their practice, and they would not be accepted if they weren't. So I think they're developing positively, but maybe someone here on the call has been there more recently and can tell us more.
Thank you. Jaco?
Yeah.
Would you like to go?
Well, okay. I just remembered when I see those small huts for the, or in general, these retreats in the huts, I never understood if the people are close there all the time and are being brought food, or they decide whenever they want to go out or not. And if it's not the case that they decide, how does it work with the bodily functions? And the second question was just a very personal one, which, I mean, none of them you need to reply. You said you were offered to, or suggested, just why not you build a hut and stay here? What were the things that made you not to do so if you felt tempted? And do you ever feel sorry about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I'll take a stab at both questions, Jakob. Thank you. So first of all, about great question. I didn't have enough time to explain the full model of hermitism that is revived. So the model is gradual. So it looks like that people are training in open hermitages and group hermitages like this collective one called Gomda, and the Da is the Da like school. So it's meditation school literally. And so they come together, they're given refuge vows, they're taught to read very often, and they're given explanations. And then in these huts, they individually sit. Sometimes there's also their cousin or their sister or someone from their family, learning the meditations and going through this whole Ngondro. So in the Kagyu tradition, there are these preliminary practices, and so doing these, and then gradually, when they become more proficient in meditation, and the proficiency is tested by the Lama in interviews, close interviews, which take the shape and form of dialogues that we know from Buddhist literature. Really, we have tons of dialogues like this recorded, like between Milarepa and his students, between Gampopa and his students. We have whole books devoted on that. And anyway, so they're assessed if they can progress, and if they can, they're slowly ready for solitude. And solitude is seen as really the pinnacle of retreat practice, complete solitude. And the pinnacle of Tibetan civilization. So it happens too, because these people are revered in society. But anyways, total solitude calls for either someone to give you your meals through an opening in the wall or outside your enclosure, or it calls for you to look for your own food, like Milarepa did. So there are these different models. And when it comes to your question on the bodily functions, so people who are walled in, they will have a toilet walled inside with them in the enclosure. And people who live in the Gomda, they're trained like military. And I've seen this in other Gomda across Kham. There is a specific time, and they all go out, to relieve themselves. the same time. And then there's a meditation session, and then they all go out, they have a chance to relieve themselves. So that's interesting. Like there's a rhythm. This community has a specific rhythm, and that also has to do with, you know, asceticism and shaping the body in alignment with certain things. So that's fascinating, and how the Lama is really the one who shapes the body, even in that way. And then your personal question, yeah, I'll try to answer. Why not build a hut and stay? It has to do with my identity as a Buddhist practitioner. I don't see myself as a hermitess. I see myself as a ngakmamor. So this is what I mentioned. So very much connected to Buddhist practice, but in connected to life, having a family, having a job. I currently even work outside of Buddhist scholarship. I work in the private sector. So, you know, very much going out there into the world and taking it by the horns and trying to practice that way. Yeah, and it also has to do with the way that I was shaped, that this identity of mine was shaped by the teachers I've met, and I consider my root teachers. So this has to do with a whole discourse on Buddhism in the West, I suppose. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question in the chat, another one, regarding that it's not surprising that Milarepa is taken as a role model, but do you know if the life story that is referred to is the much later Sanyong Haruka version, where places are clearly identified, the hand to the ear seating posture is adopted, or is there knowledge of earlier ascensions?
Oh, so these people are not scholars, and the knowledge of any versions of Milarepa's life story is not prevalent, is not social practice. But Milarepa is very much present in social practice in Kham. He is, so lay people know who Milarepa is. Everybody they just react to the white robe, and they might not know a lot of details on the ritual lineage and the other details, but they will know this is special. There is a white robe, and that communicates an accomplishment, and that's special. That's worthy of veneration, emulation, of donations. So as a field of merit. And also Milarepa is prevalent throughout hermitages across Kham, so not just Gomdra, but also other models, and not just Kajupa, really outside. I've seen it in different lineages. He is just a revered figure. He's the archetypal hermit, if you will.
Thank you. Is there any other question or?
I have one small question. First of all, thank you, Maria, for this very thing. I told you when we met last time that I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you were breaking up, but now again breaking up a little. Let's try. You can also type the question into the chat if you like.
Maybe that takes too long. Let me try one more time. I could turn off my video. Maybe I try to make it short. I was kind of experience another angle of the story that you were telling through your research, because I learned with the Lama who came from Chodok and went to France, and Genden Rinpoche, who built these amazing retreat centers there. I never had this angle of thinking in a kind of a distant way about these lamas and their charisma. So very interesting to have this reflective position about this phenomenon and the tension around it, how in a way Buddhism looks at effacing self-importance, but then you have, as a skillful means, you have to promote it. I'm wondering, to which degree were you able to discuss such questions with the lamas there, or with Repa Tsultim Tarchin? Was it at all possible, or just your own internal work?
Thank you, Yulia. First of all, it's a joy to see you again. I'm wondering if you're in Nepal or?
I'm currently in Germany, but
Oh,
still
okay.
based in Nepal.
Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. Anyway, wonderful to see you. Thank you for your question. So, yeah, are you referring to any particular questions I could ask Lama Tsotin Tajin, or whether I could work with him as my informant for the study?
Well, if you could reflect together with him that in some sense he has to promote himself as a person to be emulated, and at the same time, giving a teaching where we step away from making ourselves first. I don't know how that makes sense. Having himself as object of observation, you do action of what he's doing, what his social role is in promoting the hermit lifestyle. Any of these questions, was it possible to discuss that with him, or did you only have a religious relationship with him and all the rest is your academic work?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so now I understand. So I didn't pose this question directly because questions like this, as you might imagine, are, you don't ask those questions. But I did hear a lot around his choice of wearing the robe, the white robe only. And so he associates himself very much with tradition. Well, first of all, with the Kagyu patriarchs who wore the white robe after Milarepa, and there was a whole lineage of them, a whole bunch of them. Then with his root lama and with his lifestyle, basically. So his choice to him communicates his lifestyle and positions himself as this ascetic lama. So that's his take on that, I would say. Yeah. This is what that's how I understand his words.
Okay. Well, you also talked about the nuns, and with the picture how they had maybe a tense relationship about the fact of being observed as objects of study. Did you engage with any one of them in a discussion about your work, or they just tolerated that you did that too?
Yeah. So first of all, it was difficult because it was difficult to make people understand what I'm actually doing because obviously Western educational models are very different. So nobody would understand academic work, dissertation, any of that. And so I consulted some, locals, and I came up with a version of introducing myself. I am writing a book on hermits for Western universities. So that was palatable enough, but that also created a problem with the nuns, with the Gema. This is, by the way, we're inside a hut. I'm just sneaking in a few photos that I haven't been able to show you. So we're inside a cabin like this with meditation boxes where they sit all night. They don't sleep in lying down. And so they wouldn't understand. Many of them, they have this self-deprecating view of themselves where they wouldn't be comfortable to talk about anything, even if I asked them about their sources of fuel and what they like to eat for lunch. They would say, no, this is I know you're doing this research, so you better talk to a lama and to a male scholar, to a scholar and to a male one. They didn't want to talk to me. I became, with time, I became friends with some of them and had some relationship with them. So we managed to meditate together a couple of times and spend some time together and eat and just to kind of, yeah, just be there. But there was not, I was different. Um, they didn't understand my position because I was there to live like them, and yet I was privileged because I didn't have to take all the vows. I didn't have to do everything. I got to wear my earrings, which they could see, kind of poke them in the eye. Most of them were young women renouncing so much, joy that we know as young women that, they would never touch. So yeah, so we had conversations like this where I was mistrusted for that, and that also contributed to the fact that I just kind of everything, the whole fieldwork period was kind of concluded pretty prematurely.
Okay. Thank you. I'd love to hear much more, but maybe when you come next year to Nepal, then we can talk. Are you coming to the IATS?
I am supposed to maybe participate virtually. So
Okay, great.
let's see how that goes. Thank you. Yeah, and I'd love to stay in touch. with
Yes.
you, yeah, and with everybody who's here on the call. I think we are slowly approaching.
Yes, thank you so much. But I wanted to ask one question, a very short one, and one commentary. Did you become a practitioner or a scholar first?
Practitioner first. Yes, I was a Buddhist first. Yes, very good question. And then because I've always had a love of academia and scholarship, yeah, that became my sort of idea about making a living and yeah, maybe making a living.
But you are still a practitioner and you're a scholar as well. And that's wonderful. And then second commentary question, if no one else wants to ask a question, to wrap it up, have you considered, Isabel, did you show something?
Yeah, I had a tiny question, but you can ask
Okay.
yourself your question first.
Okay, I just wondered if you have considered maybe nominating your book for the AAS Book Prize. That was because I saw this, I see this news quite a few times, and while we were preparing your talk, I was thinking, maybe I should ask this.
Oh, thank you. That's a compliment. I actually don't know what it is, so maybe I should ask you when we get off.
I will send you, yeah, because it's until June
Great.
30.
Thank you. Yeah. Not familiar with book prizes. It's my first book. I'm intending to write more, but it's my first book, so.
Yeah. Isabel.
Yeah, it's about the Gene Smith Book Prize. Okay, my question was, can you please show us again the ritual boundary picture of Charpo, what's his name? Because I was intrigued by the drawings under the Tibetan writings.
Mhm.
And there seems to be geometric creatures like here. Okay, you see, oops.
Can you see?
Okay, no, then that's not the one, is it? Yes, yeah, sorry, this is the one. So you see in the lower part, there seems to be earth creatures, or is it me who's inventing things from the from the visuals? Is this Topje or any of the how to say earth owners, Sabdach or whatever of the place, or Scorpio maybe? Do you have any comment on what these are and how it fits with the notion of boundary?
Yeah. So to me, what I'm seeing is I think it's a Scorpio, it's a Kila, a ritual dagger, and a doji. And to me, they have to do with Gur Doji Drakpo specifically. So his specific power to keep the boundary and to seal the Drukang, because the Drukang, the 3-year retreat enclosures are sealed ritually even, yeah? The people take an oath, and there's also additional rituals, which I have to admit I don't know, but there's additional rituals of sealing, and that may be a part of that, but this is specifically local because this is supposed to be a ne or a special place, sacred place devoted to Guru Dorje Drakpo. So that's how I understand the drawings underneath.
Thank you very much.
If there are no other questions, I think we should let Maria go because she's been very generous with us. And thank you so much. Congratulations once again. We are very honored to have you here and to have this rich presentation and rich discussion afterwards. So thank you and all the very best.
Thank you so much to Natalia and Isabel for organizing. Thank you all for coming and wonderful. Good luck to you all, and hopefully we meet soon under happy circumstances. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.